Welcome back to the channel. Today's article is about 14 moments in American history that sound more like urban legends than truth. Let's get into it. Moment number 1 is that a town elected a dog as mayor multiple times. The small town of Rabbit Hash, Kentucky has a tradition of electing dogs as mayor. It all started in 1998 when a black Labrador named Goofy was elected as a fundraising gimmick for the town's historical society. Since then, multiple dogs have served as mayor, including a pit bull and a French bulldog. The town doesn't actually have a human mayor, so these canine politicians get the top spot by default. Rabbit Hash residents take their dog mayors very seriously, and the elections often raise thousands of dollars for charity. The mayors don't do much in terms of legislation, but they do attend town events and post for a lot of photos. Other animals, including a cat and a donkey, have run for the position, but dogs always seem to win. In a world of messy politics, Rabbit Hash proves that sometimes the best leaders have 4 legs and a wagging tail. Moment number 2 is that the US once planned to blow up the moon to scare the Soviets. During the height of the Cold War, the US seriously considered detonating a nuclear bomb on the moon. The top secret plan was called Project 8119, was designed to intimidate the Soviet Union by demonstrating American military power. Scientists believed the explosion would be visible from Earth, sending a clear message that the US was not to be messed with. However, some experts warned that the blast might have unexpected consequences, including altering the moon's orbit. Thankfully, cooler heads prevailed and the plan was abandoned in favor of more peaceful space exploration. The US ultimately won the space race by landing on the moon in 1969, no explosions required. However, the fact that nuclear bombing the moon was even on the table is deeply unsettling. Imagine how different history would have been if the first lunar events humans saw was a mushroom cloud. Moment number 3 was when a dead man won a U.S. Senate seat. In 2000, Missouri voters elected Mel Carnahan to the U.S. Senate, despite the fact that he had died in a plane crash 3 weeks earlier. Jane Martinson from The Guardian reports, Carnahan, the sitting governor, was running against incumbent John Ashcroft when this tragic accident occurred. Instead of pulling his name from the ballot, Missouri Democrats pledged to give his seat to his widow, Jean Carnahan, if he won. Voters honored his memory and he won, making him the only deceased person ever elected to the Senate. Since a dead man obviously can't take office, Jean Carnahan was appointed to serve in his place. She held the seat for 2 years before losing in a special election. The whole situation was a political and legal oddity, but it showed just how much people respected Mel Carnahan. It also meant that John Ashcroft lost to a man who wasn't even alive, a fact that surely stung. Moment number 4 was that the US once had a nationwide cheese giveaway because of one giant cheese. In 1802, President Thomas Jefferson was gifted a 1,235-pound wheel of cheese by dairy farmers from Cheshire, Massachusetts, according to Jackie Piedo. The massive block of cheese, known as the Mammoth Cheese, was a political statement meant to show support for Jefferson's policies. It sat in the White House for years, and by the time Andrew Jackson took office, it had aged into a smelly, inedible mess. To get rid of it, Jackson hosted a public event where people could take some chunks of cheese for free. So many people showed up that the entire White House smelled like cheese for weeks. The event was such a spectacle that it inspired future politicians to hold their own cheese giveaways. Decades later, Franklin D. Roosevelt and even modern presidents revived the tradition of publicly sharing cheese. Who knew dairy could have such a lasting impact on American history? Moment number 5 was when Congress almost voted to change the US language to German. There's a long-standing myth that German nearly became the official language of the United States. While that's not exactly true, there was a moment in 1795 when Congress debated printing federal documents in German. A vote was held and it reportedly lost by just one vote, a story that has since been exaggerated into the US almost spoke German myth. In reality, English was always the dominant language, but the debate reflected the large number of German-speaking immigrants at the time. The idea wasn't entirely far-fetched since German communities were thriving in Pennsylvania and beyond. Some states even printed legal documents in German for the local populations. However, English remained the de facto language, and the German proposal never gained serious traction. Still, it's fun to imagine an alternate reality where the Star-Spangled Banner is sung in German. Moment number 6 is the Great Molasses Flood. In 1919, Boston experienced a bizarre and tragic event known as the Great Molasses Flood. A massive molasses storage tank 50 feet tall and 90 feet in diameter burst open on a warm January day, releasing over 2 million gallons of molasses into the streets at an estimated speed of 35 miles per hour. The flood of sticky molasses caused widespread destruction, knocking over buildings, buckling railroad tracks, and tragically killing 21 people while injuring 150 others. The cleanup was a massive undertaking as the molasses coated everything in its path, and even the streets remained sticky for months afterwards. Many blamed the tank's faulty construction and poor maintenance for the disaster, and the company that owned it faced a lawsuit. This strange and horrifying event is still talked about in Boston today, where people joke that the city is always a little bit sweeter. It's one of the most bizarre disasters in American history that you won't believe happened. Moment number 7 is that the US once paid an entire ransom in nickels. In 1973, the US government needed to pay a ransom to North Vietnamese forces to secure the release of American prisoners of war. But instead of paying in standard bills, they delivered the entire amount, $3 million in nickels. This wasn't a prank, it was a deliberate move to slow down the enemy's ability to use the money. The sheer weight of the coins made it difficult to transport, creating logistical headaches for the recipients. The tactic was part of a broader strategy to disrupt North Vietnam's economy. Though the ransom was paid, the move highlighted the lengths the US was willing to go in negotiations. It also proved that sometimes pettiness can be a powerful weapon in international relations. Imagine trying to carry millions of nickels throughout the jungle. Talk about a heavy payday. Moment number 8 was when the US military once tried to weaponize bat bombs. During World War II, the US government experimented with an unusual and slightly terrifying weapon, bat bombs. The idea was to attach tiny incendiary devices to bats, release them over Japanese cities, and let them roost in wooden buildings before detonating. The project, officially called Project X-Ray, was actually promising during tests, as the bats effectively spread fire over a wide area. However, things took a disastrous turn when some armed bats accidentally escaped and set a US military base on fire. Despite early success, the project was scrapped in favor of the atomic bomb. Scientists estimated that bat bombs could have been just as destructive as nuclear weapons, but at a fraction of the cost. However, the unpredictability of the bats made them too risky to deploy. It remains one of the strangest and most chaotic military experiments in history. Moment number 9 was when a congressman beat another congressman with a cane on the Senate floor. In 1856, a debate over slavery in the U.S. Senate turned violent when Congressman Preston Brooks attacked Senator Charles Sumner with a cane. Sumner had given a fiery anti-slavery speech in which he insulted Brooks' cousin. Senator Andrew Butler. Furious, Brooks stormed into the Senate chamber and began beating Sumner over the head with his cane, nearly killing him. The attack was so brutal that Sumner was left unconscious and unable to return to the Senate for years. Instead of being arrested, Brooks was celebrated in the South, with supporters even sending him new canes to replace the one he broke during the beating. Meanwhile, Sumner became a martyr for the anti-slavery movement, and the incident further inflamed tensions between the North and the South. The attack highlighted just how deeply divided the country was before the Civil War. It's one of the most shocking moments in physical violence over to take place in Congress. Moment number 10 was a man who survived 2 atomic bombs. Tsutomu Yamaguchi is one of the luckiest or unluckiest men in history. He was in Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, when the first atomic bomb was dropped, surviving with serious burns but making it out alive. Just 3 days later, he returned to his hometown Nagasaki, where the second bomb was dropped. Incredibly, he survived again, making him one of the only officially recognized survivors of both atomic bombings. Yamaguchi lived into his 90s and spent much of his life advocating for nuclear disarmament. His story sounds like something out of a dark science fiction novel, but it's absolutely real. Despite suffering radiation exposure twice, he lived a long life and even went on to have children. His incredible resilience made him a symbol of survival against impossible odds. Moment number 11 was the US once had a secret plan to build a spy base on the moon. During the Cold War, the US military secretly planned to build a spy base on the moon. The project, called Project Horizon, was proposed in 1959 and involved setting up a manned military outpost to keep an eye on the Soviet Union. The plan even included a nuclear weapon just in case the Soviets tried to take over the moon first. Officials estimated it would take about 12 astronauts and nearly 250 rocket launches to complete the base. However, the project was abandoned because of cost and logistical concerns. Instead, the US focused on beating the Soviets to the moon through NASA's Apollo program. While Project Horizon never became a reality, the fact that military officials seriously considered a lunar spy base is mind-blowing. Imagine if the first moon landing had involved soldiers instead of astronauts. Moment number 12 was when the US once tried to ban sliced bread. In 1943, the US government briefly banned sliced bread in an effort to conserve resources during World War II. Officials believed that the special machinery and packaging used for pre-sliced bread were wasting valuable materials like metal and wax paper. The ban was widely unpopular, with newspapers and housewives complaining that it made daily life unnecessarily difficult. One letter to the government even described it as a terrible shock to families across the country. After just 2 months, the ban was quietly lifted with no real explanation. It turns out that the government had overinvested how much the ban would actually save. Bread companies went right back to slicing loaves, and Americans rejoiced. It's still one of the strangest and most unnecessary bans in US history. Moment number 13 was when the US accidentally dropped nuclear bombs on itself twice. The US military has had multiple close calls with nuclear weapons, including 2 incidents where it accidentally dropped atomic bombs on American soil. In 1958, a B-47 bomber flying over South Carolina accidentally released a nuclear bomb over a small town. Thankfully, the bomb wasn't armed with its nuclear core, but it still exploded and left a massive crater in someone's backyard. The homeowner later sued the Air Force for damages, which seems fair considering he almost got nuked. Just 3 years later, in 1961, a B-52 bomber broke apart over North Carolina, dropping 2 nuclear bombs near Goldsboro. One of the bombs nearly detonated, with 3 out of 4 safety mechanisms failing before it was stopped. Had it exploded, it would have been more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb, wiping out much of the East Coast. These incidents serve as terrifying reminders of just how close the US has come to nuclear disaster. And finally, moment number 14 was when a US president was once arrested while in office. In 1872, President Ulysses S. Grant was arrested while serving as commander-in-chief for speeding in his horse-drawn carriage. Washington, D.C. police had received complaints that Grant was racing his buggy through the streets, so an officer pulled him over and gave him a warning. The next day, Grant was caught speeding again, and this time he was arrested and taken to the police station. He paid a $20 fine and was released without further punishment. What makes this even funnier is that the officer who arrested Grant was a fan of his and felt bad about it. However, he insisted that the law applied to everyone, even the president. Grant reportedly took the whole thing in stride, showing no hard feelings toward the officer. He remains the only sitting US president known to have been arrested. Alright, there you have it, 14 moments in American history that sound more like urban legends than the truth. What do you think of these moments in history? Crazy stuff, right? Apparently those atomic bombs almost went off. That one was a shocker. Put it in the comment section, which one surprised you the most, these 14 moments? And as always, we have fresh content going up to the channel daily. Be sure to give this one a like if you enjoyed these 14 moments. And if you really enjoy this sort of content, consider subscribing to the channel.